Hello and welcome to another edition of Foundation 101 podcast by MH Crew, where we look every week on foundation, their use in practice from all angles in connection with businesses, in connection with real estate assets, in connection with other strategic or high value assets. This morning, I'm joined by Kat Zagati. Kat, good morning.
Good morning, Jan.
And we will not be talking consolidation today, but we'll be talking of another topic that is related to it, which is the new ultimate beneficial owner regulations, which are upon us here in the UAE. So would you mind explaining us what these UBO regulations are?
Sure. So the UBO regulations came into force on the 28th of August 2020, and it relates to minimum disclosure requirements for UAE entities with respect to shareholders, ultimate beneficiaries, and directors. This regulation is applicable to UAE mainland's free zones and offshore entities, excluding the financial free zones of the DIFC and the DGM, as they already have in place internal regulations tackling the registration of beneficial owners and nominee directors.
So my first takeaway is that it's a very broad spectrum for a federal law. So why the UBO regulation and why now?
So substantial resources have been put towards the UAE AML CFT strategy, which, as we know, is an item at the top of the policy agenda. So in short time, we've witnessed the UAE having taken significant steps in straightening its framework. Not only that, outside the DIFC and the DGM, there was a pressing need to uniformize ongoing compliance requirements across a vastly fragmented system of registers. For instance, there are 39 different company registers spread between non-financial free zones and UAE mainland. This is what the regulations tackle.
Okay, so if I see you want to implement some homogeneity there, what are the obligations that are mandated by UBOR?
Okay, so companies must identify their beneficial owner and nominee director, if any, and then submit to the competent authorities the shareholders register, the BO register, and the directors register.
Okay, so if you want to do that, you better know what a nominee director and an ultimate beneficial owner is. So what is a beneficial owner under the regulation?
Okay, so a UBO is an individual who owns or controls or has a right to vote over at least 25% of a company's shares. It's also important to note here that companies can have more than one UBO.
Okay, and what if you cannot identify a UBO that answers to that specific definition?
Well, in this case, if no such person is identified, then the UBO is an individual who exercises control over the company. And in the absence of any of the above, the UBO is the senior manager of the company.
So there's never not ultimate beneficial owner under the regulation. You must identify someone or something or a combination of these two eventually and have it ready, file it with the registrar and keep it in your records and update it as you go. Now, that is beneficial owners. The law also tackles something called a nominee director. This is the first time this is defined under the UAE federal framework. So what is a nominee director?
A nominee director is an individual serving in a director capacity and acting in accordance with guidelines, instructions, or will of another person.
So now you've scared us enough with some nasty definitions. So how can I prepare if I run one or several companies and submit to the registrar?
Okay, the registers in the UAE are free to adopt their own approach towards filing. For instance, a notification scope, process, format, deadlines, and so on. So to help navigate this administrative maze, you will see here a UBOR tracker highlighting key procedural steps of the most relevant UAE registers with respect to the UBO ongoing compliance.
Okay, and of course we have this available on a weekly basis and we regularly update this. So this is changing and still moving. Are there any deadlines that needs to be met in this process?
Yes, for sure. So nominee directors serving in such capacity must have notified the register by the 23rd September 2020. And all companies are required to submit the UBO information to the relevant register within 60 days from the U-Board entering into force, or within 60 days from the date of a company's license renewal issuance, whichever comes first.
Okay. And do all companies in the UAE need to adhere to the deadline? I mean, you mentioned it, it's quite a wide spectrum.
Yeah, as I said, the regulations do not apply to companies established in the UAE's financial free zones,
Yes.
EBGM and the IFC, and also to companies wholly owned by federal or local government.
Okay, so I understand this is a one-time exercise for historically operating company. What if a company has been set up and started to operate in 2020?
So in this case, the company would have most likely already complied with the regulations at the time of registration. So if this is the case, then no further action is needed in that respect.
A very hot topic is always privacy. So what interests people is, okay, I'm happy to provide my data, but what happens to my data? We see jurisdiction like Scandinavia where ultimate beneficial owner data is out there in the public domain. Will this be the case in the UAE?
No. The information contained in the company's registers will be kept confidential by the relevant register and will only be shared upon formal approval of the BO or the nominee director.
All right, so the same sort of data that you actually have at the land department today. Land department
Yeah.
in the UAE is not public, and you can only get this data if you seek approval of the registered owner of that property. That is satisfying to me, and still clearly the UAE is online to keep its policy of privacy matters to people. Now, I'll finish off with an example with you. If we said that we could define a beneficial owner multiple ways, it's reasonably easy if you're an individual that owns a company. Here, for example, in a UAE LLC, if you are the foreign owner, then no problem. The 49% will be a beneficial owner. It's a little bit more complicated if you are to employ the services of a local partner who may be passive. Because he may be a beneficial owner or he may not. This will depend on the nature of the arrangement you have with him, her, or this entity controlled by UAE national. If you have some sort of side agreement or some sort of trust agreement or a risk mitigation package, as we like to do it at MHQ, you will need to look at the fine print. Are these local partners bona fide beneficial owners or not? And you need to make it correct. The same way, if you do it this way, the way we use it at MHQ, which is often the foreign investors will have a holding, corporate holding. The local partner will have his own SPV or holding, and then these two vehicles will create the operational vehicle. Who is a beneficial owner here? We do not have an individual straight away, so we need to go up. Investor on the left-hand side, he is a beneficial owner. He controls more than 25%. But what about the local partner? Is he a beneficial owner in this scenario? Well, it will depend on the nature of the instruments that are implemented between these two entities. And if the foreign investor is deemed to control more of the voting rights, of the control powers of the right-hand side vertical of the local partner, then the local partner will not be a beneficiary. But again, it's in the fine print, and that's where Kat and the team can help. And hey, this is a foundation podcast. So what if we have a foundation here at the top? Typically, this can be used on the foreigner side. This can be used on the local partner side for an array of benefits: business continuity, asset protection, legacy planning. And you will see it more and more on the UAE partner side. There, it will depend not on who necessarily controls, but who benefits from the foundation. And again, you will need to look at the fine print. Am I a genuine bona fide beneficiary, or is so much control shifted to the other party that actually this party, the local partner one, is no longer deemed a beneficial owner under the regulation? Anyway, this is just to explain that local structures can be a little bit more complicated. It's usually quite straightforward as far as free zone entities and offshore entities. As a reminder, all of these outside of the IFC and ADGM fall in the scope As another reminder, the deadline is already passed. We are in the grace period. So if you have any question on how your business should be treated, the steps you should be doing, and how to file and how to maintain your registers, you can get in touch with Kat, with myself, or your usual MHQ relationship manager to learn how we can help you and add value to the company now and going forward. Kat Zagati, thank you very much and good day ahead.
Thank you.